All right, welcome to the last day of the beginning of your career. Last chapter, this is it. You have the third test coming up. Once you pass that third exam, if you have the correct passing score, your certificate will be printed automatically for you. Well, you actually have to go push the button, print certificate. It will print your certificate. Don't forget there is a chapter right below the third test that talks about how to get how to register for your test. Read that. There's a link there that'll click you over to take your final exam, which you can then call them to schedule the final exam. Anybody scheduled the final exam yet? One nerd in the group. When is it? Did they tell you how long the delay was? Okay. So you I think they're 7 or 8 days out. So if you called today, you couldn't get in for 7 or 8 days, all right? So keep that in mind. If you have vacations coming up or anything like that, you may have to call and schedule now to get something in the next couple of weeks. Now, that could change based on the time of the year and all that, but you call up, you ask for a date, they'll give you a date. They may say we don't have any openings until X, and that's when you would schedule it, all right? There's a chapter in there that'll help you do that with a link to the page to Pearson VUE. All right, last chapter, investing. Investing, this chapter to me is one of those, once again, that being the last one, it's probably a reason it was last. It's not that I don't really enjoy it. I started out as an investor. I owned property long before I had my license. That's how I actually got into this when I first started. I'm a little disappointed that there could be a lot more in this chapter, but this is basically an overview, all right? So one of the biggest advantages to real estate is the fact that you can leverage property, right? Leverage is the use of opium. You guys know what that is, right? OPM, other people's money. Opium. Not what you were thinking. Other people's money. Think about this. It used to be, a couple years ago, you could leverage 100% with $0, right? Go out and get a 100% loan. Nowhere else in the world can you leverage $100 with $10, 10% loan. FHA is only 3.5. Think about that. I'm controlling $100 with $3.50 of my own money. That's a good gig, all right? And I'm going to put a tenant in there to pay back that money, and they're going to pay more than they pay back, so I get cash flow, and every time they make a payment, I get credit for it in my credit. So there are many great advantages to owning real estate. The downside is called liquidity. Liquidity. In the stock market, if you called your stockbroker right now and say, hey, sell my shares of Ford, before you drop the phone on the receiver, they're gone. He can sell them at the market right now, presuming you called during the market open, okay? Let's take that into consideration. Selling real estate takes way longer, and sometimes you may not sell it at all. I could sell you one of my rentals right now for $100 in cash or $20. I just saw he had a $20 bill out. I could sell to him for $20 in cash. He's still going to want title work run on it. That may be 3 or 4 days. 3 or 4 days may not seem like a long time unless I need that $20 for my lunch today. And you guys know I probably eat 2 or 3 lunches in one day. What was the second breakfast? Wasn't that a Hobbit thing? That's a my house thing. I'm kind of a light eater. As soon as it gets light, I start eating. So it takes time. And sometimes you can't even sell it. It gets upside down. It becomes in a bad neighborhood all of a sudden. And investors, there have been many investors I know that have wanted to sell property that have never really got around to selling it. All right? Investing can be expensive. That's a downside. You don't really put $3.50 in. You may need $35,000. All right? So it can be expensive compared to stocks or comic books or other things like that. Another problem does require a lot of management. Investing in real estate does require a lot of management. Even if you hire a manager, you still got to deal with that manager every once in a while because there's going to be problems. Hot water breaks, tenants gone, things like that. So that brings about this thing called a high degree of risk. All right? So that's another disadvantage, is the high degree of risk that's involved. Some of the other advantages that I missed, I just want to go back and touch on. You have control of your investment. Unlike Ford, theoretically you get a vote of the 12 million shares, but if you're the sole owner of a rental property and you want to paint it blue, dude, paint it blue. You're the controlling interest. That's another advantage to owning real estate. There's also some tax advantages to investing in real estate. And we'll talk about depreciation, which we've already touched on, and things like that. Now, when it comes to making money in real estate, there are several ways to make money on the income property. The most notable one is this thing called appreciation. You want your property to get worth more in the future and appreciate. Now, the one thing you have to understand about appreciation is it has to outpace what's called inflation. Right? Inflation means the cost of the dollar. Appreciation is your value goes up. So if the value in your house goes up $10, but the inflation went up $10, your house value didn't change at all. Everybody understand that concept? So what you want is your appreciation to go up $10 and the inflation on the dollar to go up $5. Now I've made $5, right? So appreciation is probably the most number one way people try and make money on investment property, but it still has to outpace the inflation of the dollar itself. That's one way to make money. Some land has intrinsic value. We talked about that. Broad Ripple will have value above inflation simply because of where it is. Center Grove is starting to get that. All right? Keystone at the Crossing, if you're in the commercial world, pay more because it's a reason, who knows why. We talked about depreciation, and remember, unimproved land, we beat this horse many times. You can't depreciate land. Hence the land lease. Hence the sale leaseback. Those companies that buy land, you cannot write it off on anything. You're just out the $2 million. You got this asset, but you don't get to depreciate that asset over any time frame. Another way to make money is this thing called cash flow. Remember cash flow? It's at the bottom of that equation. Gross income minus your net. Then you pay your debt service, which is a mortgage payment, and you're left with cash flow. Is it possible your cash flow is negative? Yes. In the investing world, we call that an alligator because it bites you in the butt every month. You know, your debt service is more than the net income you generated. And that's probably because your expenses are too high or your gross income is too low. Or your debt service is too high. You leverage too much. All right? Leverage is when you borrow money to finance the property. It's the use of other people's money. It works just like the loan-to-value ratio. Typically, they like loan-to-value when dealing in owner-occupied property, 70% loan-to-value. In the investment world, they usually say it's 70% leveraged. All right? Means the same concept. If I'm fully leveraged, how much equity do I have? None. Fully leveraged means 100% other people's money. The higher the leverage, the less the equity goes. Some people like higher leverage. Some people do not. All right? Higher leverage tends to move your cash flow lower. Just look at that equation. If I got net income and I subtract my house payment, I get cash flow. If I raise my house payment up because I leveraged more, my cash flow goes down. But I put no money into the deal. So there's a trade-off. 100% leveraged, my cash flow is X dollars a month. Could have been higher if I'd have put money down, but I didn't want to put money down, so I saved my capital and transferred it to cash flow. As you make your payments, we saw this in the curve earlier in the financing section. Remember, each payment, more equity each time? That's called an equity buildup. Every time I make a house payment, I get more equity because a portion of my payment pays down the equity. So as I'm paying down the debt, my equity goes up. It's called an equity buildup. Don't get confused on the trick. Equity buildup is virtually the same thing as what? Mortgage buy down. As your mortgage goes down, your equity goes up. All right? Now, you can use that equity in some manner to be the down payment on another property. This is called pyramiding. Pyramiding is when you take one investment property and you put it on top of another investment property. All right? Now, the book advocates two ways to pyramid. I will tell you, a true investor, there's only one way to pyramid. One of the ways the book talks about pyramiding is this thing they call pyramiding through sale. Pyramiding through sale. Where you sell the property, you take the equity that you created, and you buy a bigger property. The book calls that pyramiding. Most investors do not. Pyramiding implies you're building one on top of the other. So what you do is the second way is called pyramiding through refinance, where you generate equity in a property like my old picture, borrow that equity as the down payment on the next property. You still have the first property you own, you take all the equity out, and you buy a second property. Then you generate a bunch of equity in the second property, take it out to buy the third property. And you keep pyramiding one on top of the other. The problem with pyramiding through refinance is at some point they're all dependent upon each other. And if somebody at the top of the pyramid doesn't, say, pay their monthly rent payment, now you don't have enough to pay the second or the third, so you could jeopardize the entire chain if you pyramid too big. All right? So pyramiding is just a method of starting with one. It's like the old Monopoly. I start with a house, buy another house, pyramid it into a hotel. All right? I'm going to stop the audio here.